so Aaron was my honey for close to 11 years. And we had been very active all of those years together, doing El Tour 9, 10, 11 times, playing tennis, hiking, walking, I mean, just everything in the outdoors that we loved here. And we intended to keep doing that. And all of a sudden, he started having some trouble. He was diagnosed in May of 2010 with ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. And went from a robust, active, healthy tennis player, avid bike rider, hiker, to completely paralyzed in a power wheelchair, unable to move. So somewhere during that time, roughly summer of 2011, after he'd been diagnosed for about a year, spontaneously out of the blue, he said, "What do you think about going back to church?" And I was like, wow, I don't even know where that came from, but I was so happy to hear it, and I thought, well, you know, here he is, he's asking me, and I would have done anything for him, so if you want to go to church, I'll take you to church, I mean, whatever. And so we showed up, and we showed up actually 9/11/2011 at the first time at Casas, and got out of the van, and he rolled in with the power chair, and I walked in, and I thought this is going to be totally overwhelming, totally too big, too many people, we're going to feel like fish out of water, I don't know what I'm doing here. But we walked and rolled in the door, and I am not kidding, from the minute we set foot in the door, it was like, that was my 1 hour each week that I could go in there, sit down in the seat, just take a big deep breath and feel peaceful, feel happy, feel love around me, feel the music, and just feel great. And I could put the rest of the world aside for that hour. And I thought at the time, wow, this is something that Aaron, you know, he did, you know, ask me for, and I thought naively, okay, I'm doing this for him, get him back to church, this is what he wants and he needs, and let's do it. And it became so clear after a while that he did it for me. He brought me back to church, that he knew I missed it, and that he knew he wasn't going to be around very much longer, and he knew that I needed support. And he got me back in, and that's exactly the way it worked, because I found the support, I found the love, I found the peace being there, and I found Jesus again. Aaron had told me for 2 years, he told me, you've got to promise me something. You've got to promise me that you will meet somebody else, that you won't be alone, that you will love again, that you'll find somebody good. I'll be very upset if you don't do this, and I want you to do this, and he meant it. And so I wasn't thinking along those lines at all, I wasn't planning on it, but then I met Kevin.
That was April, early May, and we didn't meet, like Karen said, really until November. Just met each other in the hall, and she said maybe we could get together and talk, because I knew Aaron had passed. I went to the memorial service at the VA and just saw how she carried herself, how his family was there, and how close they all were. They came in from Georgia, and what a beautiful thing it was just for him, and the whole cafeteria was full. When
I met Kevin and then we talked about everything, it was like, now I can grieve, okay? It allowed me to cry, it allowed me to just say it all out, the good, the bad, as they say, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and just get it all out, and then tell him what happened to me at Casas and how it changed my life. And I knew right then and there that if he was a person who said to me at that point at the beginning of our relationship that, well, I don't really believe in church, or I don't go to church, or I don't want any part of that, that would have been the end. That would have been the end of it, because now I had changed. I wasn't going back. I wanted him to be part of that, but I didn't say that. I just kind of let to see what would happen. And very shortly after we started talking, he said to me, would it be okay if I came to church with you? I was like, wow, okay. Wow, this is, of course it would.
It was something that I so desired. some kind of that kind of peace. And I finally asked her if I could go with her to church one day. And walking in was like, whoa. And but everybody from the start, the person that shook my hand as I came in the door, sat down, and the person that would come up and just introduce themselves and talk about newcomers, and that's me. And I felt special just with that. The music, I felt an instant connection, and it felt like home.
I just wanted you to have the opportunity to meet Kevin and Karen and just say thank you for just allowing us to just be a part of your story and just what you shared. And you all in this service in particular get another added treat in getting to be a part of another step in this wonderful story here. And so, Kevin, I'm just going to let you say something here if you'd like to. Can we hear? Yes. I bet you don't know what's coming now.
These past 4 months have been by far the happiest time of my entire life. I still pinch myself every day to see if I'm breathing, and thank God for the gift of life. And in many ways, God will change that. And being here, a part of this amazing church is one of the ways that you've changed my life, and it was you, because it was the power of your faith, Karen, in the worst times that made me want to come see what kind of community we support and nurture that kind of faith. And it was a part of your love of God and the relationship you had with Jesus that made me go for the same kind of relationship and fully commit myself and accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And for so many reasons, sweetheart, I'm so in love with you. My greatest wish is to spend the rest of my life with you.
So, I said it was going to be a unique morning. Another first in the history of Casas. Right there. Thank you very much, Luke. I love their story. I love their story because it is a story that starts with Aaron, who has something in Christ and begins to see that Karen needs this. And what he does in that moment is he understands that he's not going to be here and that she needs something sustainable in her spiritual life. And he brings her to this place. And you all became that for her. You were the community that did so much in her life. And what I love about this story is it shows the movement of the church. That is, you all became that very special thing in her life, where she came into that very unique relationship with Christ. She became a part of that movement and then reached out and did for Kevin what was once done for her. And that is the power of a movement, and that is what a church is. Now, of course, we live in a very different kind of world, don't we? Where there are many, many people that are longing for those deeper answers. And this morning, as I end this series, I'm not going to give kind of a regular sermon. I want to have a moment to just really talk with you all directly here. And so if you leave here this morning and you say, I don't know that really felt like a sermon, okay? It's because in many ways it's really not. But there is a vision of things that I want to share with you that's related to what you saw there. You know, Ryan started off this series and kind of gave us this deep look at the culture that we live in. We live in this hyperactive culture in so many ways that's lost its connection to the past, its story of where it is, and it's lost its sense of the future and where it's going. And as Ryan talked about, people get trapped in this kind of present moment that is very, very shallow. And they are asking these deep questions of the soul, and there's not any answers. And what's weird is, we live in a culture where people think of and speak of being so disconnected. And yet, think about it. In many ways, we live in a world where we would be what I would call hyper-connected. I mean, we are connected in every way imaginable all of the time. Think about your cell phone, for instance. You know, it used to be that we would think of a cell phone as just, you know, you type in a number on the keypad and then you can talk to someone with a corresponding number. Like, that's just like what a phone is. And like, if you're under 25 now, you're probably going, what? That's what a phone, that's where that started? You know? Because even with what happens with our phones today, I mean, it has you connected almost constantly, and not just in the nature of a phone, right? It is email and texting and Twitter and Facebook and FaceTime and everything else. It's connected to your calendar. This past week, I was setting up a meeting with Ryan. Ryan and I talked, and we were going to get together like the next day or a day or two, so I punched it into my phone. Only my phone, and I know this is probably operator error, I still don't know how I did this, is I just punched in the appointment with Ryan. My phone got into my contact list and invited a few other folks to show up to this meeting. So Ryan shows up in a day or two, and there are other people showing up, and I'm like, so why are you here? Because you told me to come here. I was invited. I didn't even know it. I got off the airplane a few weeks ago on a trip to Seattle and was just out of the jetway in the concourse waiting for a couple other people I had traveled with, and watching everybody get off the plane, and immediately it's just like, I've been unplugged for like 2 hours, and I've got, you know, and everyone's, one guy had 2 phones just doing this and just, oh my goodness. And we get so hyper-connected in so many ways. For example, how many of you had an Amber Alert go off in the middle of life? Yeah, we're sleeping, and we've got contact with the world around us, see? And yet, with all this connection, we are such a disconnected culture. Disconnected from others in a deep, meaningful way. Disconnected from God. And disconnected, I'll argue, in some ways from our own souls. And we're asking questions about the soul. What is the meaning of life? What is a real relationship about? What? And we have a culture that is starving for these questions. And you would think that this would be the easiest thing in the world for a church. I mean, for churches, right? These are questions of the soul. This should be our wheelhouse, right? And yet we live in a culture where churches are struggling by the droves to handle this. In fact, church attendance in our culture is at a dramatic decrease and continuing. A recent study showed that there is a significant decrease in every younger generation coming up. Smaller and smaller percentage of them not only are not wanting to go to church as they become older, they're not even considering it. And I understand in one sense. In one sense, so many churches, not all churches, but a lot of churches, and the evangelical church as a whole in some ways is trying to navigate this upheaval in our culture. And you know, when upheavals occur in cultures, oftentimes institutions are the things that get challenged and get dissolved and get threatened. And the church so often faces this. And the way they react to this is in a reactive way. They become defensive. They begin protecting their authority. They begin protecting the things that they had control over. And what's happened all too often in our culture is that churches, in this kind of reactive mode of being defensive, instead of speaking to the deepest issues of the heart, they end up putting forth a kind of lifeless religion that is nothing more than just a pathway of behavioral modification and image management. Here's what a good Christian looks like. Here's what a good Christian ought to do. And those answers, it doesn't matter how correct they are, they end up being shallow. And we live in a culture that is asking deep questions. Questions of the soul. And so they are abandoning churches by the droves. But I want you to think about this. I believe that churches that don't see themselves as institutions, but churches that see themselves as the embodiment of Christ, that they have a goal to simply express Christ that is within them, to express that Christ within the culture as a movement that is dynamic and ongoing. Churches that see themselves as a movement, I promise you, they are going to thrive in the days and decades and centuries in front of us. They are going to do very, very well because they will be able to speak to what this world needs. And you know, a week or so ago, I told you we have the answer for what the world is longing for. Let me add to that. We don't just have the answer. We are the answer. Christ is in us, and who we are as this movement is the answer. And I think what God has done with us for the past 50 years and where He's pointing us, we are going to thrive, friends. We are going to look at a culture in upheaval at different moments, and it's okay. Because I think we can look at it and say, it's just opportunity. This is our moment to just be all that God created us to be. And so I want you to think here for a moment about Christ expressed in this world. What does that mean? Because that is what the church should be, as a movement, constantly moving, dynamic, expressing Christ. Just as you saw in that video, how it has this way of just moving forward, on and on. You know, when you look at the life of Christ, there are several things that you see that I want to point out here this morning. I think of a moment when Jesus comes in contact with a guy named Matthew. And Matthew was this tax collector, and we know from the scriptures, he was a tax collector of tax collectors. He was a guy that was probably very powerful, very, very wealthy, had a lot going for him. But you know what? There had to be a part of Matthew that in all of his success and all of his wealth, there was a part of him that was empty. And there had to be a part where Matthew looked at this and said, you know what? I've made a lot of money. I've had a lot of success. I've had all of these achievements. And it just feels like more of those same kinds of achievements aren't going to fill this kind of emptiness in my soul. And there had to be a part of Matthew that wrestled with that in the culture he was in. And then there comes a day, right, where Jesus comes up to Matthew, who probably has been watching Jesus for a while. Matthew has seen a lot of other rabbis come by his booth, had a lot of conversations with him, and he never saw anything in them that would fill that emptiness in his soul until Jesus says, Matthew, follow me. And Matthew, in that moment, drops everything and follows Christ. There was something about Jesus that he saw that said, that man has something to say about this hole in my soul. And I love what happens after this. Matthew gets together a bunch of his buddies. Jesus brings in the disciples. They have this kind of celebration. They throw this party. And there are religious leaders who watch this party going on. Remember the story? And so, of course, they're asking this question. Why is it that this rabbi would be hanging out partying with these sinners, with these tax collectors? And so they start prodding some of the disciples. And it's in this discourse that Jesus makes this famous saying. This is found over in Matthew chapter 9, as they're arguing about whether or not Jesus should be hanging out with these people that really, because of all of their problems, because of all their sin, they should be condemned. And here's what Jesus says in this moment. He says, first he says this, go and learn what this means. And I love it. Just like ponder this, think about this, incorporate this into your life. And here's what he says. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And what he's saying in this moment is, you guys have missed it. You don't understand why I have come to be in this world, what I am trying to do in this world. This issue of their problems, of their fallenness in this world, I didn't come to pound them into the ground. I didn't come to condemn them for all of their sin in this world. I came into this world to be an expression of grace that would forgive them, give them a path for redemption and transformation. That's why I've come. I've come so that people that are empty will be transformed into all that God created them to be. And you know what's beautiful? When you think about Matthew, here's this guy long ways away from God, but ends up being a guy that writes a text that becomes the very first book in the New Testament. And he found that answer for his soul in just who Christ was as a person who came into this world with mercy and grace and redemption. I think of a moment when Jesus runs into a guy that is unnamed in the scriptures. We don't know his name, but we know this. He came into this world and he was hurting. He was struggling. He was a dad who had a son that was suffering from this horrible spiritual condition by which he could not talk. He would throw himself into fires, into lakes, trying to kill himself. And there is this dad that is just coming apart at the seams over the pain that he is experiencing in all of this. And he comes to this place where he has these beliefs about God. He probably grew up in the Jewish tradition. And there's these things that he says, okay, I've heard this talked about with God, and I kind of experience this. And there's a part of me that believes in God. But you know what? There's a part of me that looks at what's happening with my son. And it's hard to believe that there could be a real God in a real world if this is what's happening to my son. And this is not some intellectual argument or hypothesis about whether God does or doesn't exist. This is my real life, and I'm just struggling. I've got these beliefs, but I've got all this doubt. If there is a God, he must not love me. I doubt all of these things. And he comes to Jesus in this moment, and he lays all of this out. And Jesus engages it. And I love the way Jesus engages it. He begins to talk to him about the power of belief in his life. And then this man blurts out in this moment. And here's what he says in this moment. This is over in John chapter 9. He says this. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. And you just see this man. Jesus, I would love to believe you. And I've got to believe you. But I have a mountain of doubt. And it is just who I am. And the beauty of what happens in this story is what Jesus doesn't do. This is not a moment where Jesus says, whoa, dude, okay. You know, this is how this works. It's called faith. And you need to work on this thing. And when you come to me with faith and just know I'll fix this and have 100% belief on this thing, then I can work in your life. He doesn't do that. What Jesus does in this moment, I think, is so life-giving about the God that we follow. He creates space for this man to be authentic and to hold both the beliefs he has, but all of the doubt that is weighing his heart down. What a magnificent gift Jesus gives this man to simply be authentic in the mixture of his belief and doubt. And Jesus goes on to heal this man's son. There are no conditions upon how his level of faith. He just loves this man. And you know what else the writer doesn't put in there that I think is very interesting? It doesn't tell us what happens to this man's level of belief. Just leaves that out. You know, I hypothesize his belief had to go up some as Jesus heals his son. But it's almost like the biblical writer says, that's not the point. The point is Jesus became an expression of God in this world that created room for people wherever they are to be authentic in the place that they are. God makes room for us wherever we are. I think about a moment when Jesus shows up to a city called Sychar, which is interesting because Sychar is a land that was originally given to Joseph by his father Jacob. And the narrative of Joseph's life was God was with him. God was with him. It is this story of the deepest connection between God and Joseph. And yet the irony of this story in the New Testament is that Jesus encounters this woman in Sychar, and this woman is the exact opposite of everything we think of the narrative with Joseph. This is a woman who is lonely and disconnected. She is lonely from people around her. She does not have any friends or other women. She comes to get water in the middle of the day when no one else was there. We learn that every relationship she has had with a man has been a disaster. And you can see through the story that she is so disconnected from God, and she is even disconnected from her own soul. And Jesus comes and meets this woman where she is. And the story unfolds in this beautiful picture as this woman begins to see Jesus in greater and greater light. First, Jesus is just this man that is kind. Something she probably didn't experience a lot of. And then suddenly it's like Jesus becomes this kind of counselor figure who can offer her healing and hope. And she's drawn into this moment. And then Jesus begins speaking of things that only someone who has some special abilities, like a prophet, to be able to tell. And she goes, you must be a prophet. And all of a sudden, he goes from being a kind man to a kind of counselor to this prophet who knows. And I love what Jesus says at this point. He says, you know what? If you only knew who's asking and talking with you in this moment, you would take everything I have if you knew. Because of course, what Jesus understands in this moment is he is God, and she's not yet figured that out. And then she does. And she is undone in this moment when she discovers that in this profound loneliness from God that she's been living in, that God came and found her and connected with her. And in this moment, she now experiences what it is to be connected with the God of the universe who sought her out. And it changes her in the most profound ways. And the woman who is so lonely and disconnected does what? Runs into the village and begins sharing this. She begins this little movement of her own. What Christ did in her life, she takes it into the village. And suddenly there are people in the village that see what a profound difference. There's something that they recognize that has happened in her life that is so different. Some of them actually begin to believe that she's telling the truth and that she actually met a man that is the Messiah. They come to believe it. And I love what John does with this, because you think the story is kind of over, it kind of concludes, and then he jumps back into the story. This is found in chapter 4, John chapter 4, and it says this: as some of these Samaritans go and find Jesus now, after what's happened in this encounter with the woman, it says this in verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. And what she said was, he told me things, everything I ever did. Verse 40. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with him. And he stayed, now catch this, and he stayed with them for 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. And I love this picture where this is the movement. Jesus encounters this woman in a way that changes her life. She finds this connection, and then she carries this forward. She becomes an expression of Christ to her little village. And when she does that, they are changed to the point that they go back and now they come to learn who Christ is for themselves. Friends, that is the movement of the church. And what you see in this story is this little foreshadow of the great movement that Jesus would launch after his resurrection, called the church. And that is us. And this woman, in all of her loneliness, finds that her deepest questions are answered in God. And I love what Jesus established in all of this. And you know, when we think about the movement of the church, you have to understand this. What Jesus launched as the church has to be sustained. Movements have to be sustained. And if they're not, it's not that they just die. It's that they turn into something else that they were never meant to be. You know, when churches cease to be that beautiful expression of the deeper things of Christ, when they give up on sustaining that, they usually don't go away, not right away. What they usually become are institutions. They become religious institutions that are protecting a set of dogma and doctrine They become institutions that protect their sense of authority. They become institutions that protect their set of behaviors of what they think should or shouldn't be. And they lose their ability to transform lives. See? An interesting study came out just here recently. It looked at all of the major cities in the U.S. There's like some 30,000 cities in the U.S., 600 cities of a population of 50,000 or more. And in this, they found that Tucson, Arizona is the 11th most unchurched city in all of the U.S. That's us. 11th most unchurched city in all of the U.S. And you know, if you're an institution, that's kind of threatening, because the culture's going away from who you are. But you know what? If you're a movement, that's like good news. That's like, here's opportunity everywhere for us, because we are this beautiful expression of Christ. And God, I just think, how lucky for us. We get put right in the middle of a place where we get to be that expression of Christ. We get to be an expression where successful people are battling this sense of emptiness, that no matter how much more I accomplish, there's something that my soul is crying out for, that my success and my money and my achievements aren't going to match. See, we get to be a movement when people are saying, I don't know what to do. I see this world that's got me turned inside out, and I've got these beliefs about spiritual things, but my gosh, I've got these doubts. And the last place I think I should turn is at church. And we get to say, no. There isn't. We've made space for you. You come authentic where you are. People that feel disconnected from their souls. People that are dying over loneliness. And I am telling you, we live in a world where no matter how many Twitter accounts you have, no matter how many Facebook friends you have, no matter how often you interact with people, we live in a culture where deep down loneliness is eating away at us. And we, Casas Church, are an answer for what our culture and our city is longing for most. And here's what this means. I think it means some things for us as we begin to look at just the next year and the next 50 years. There are a couple of things that I want to point out to you here this morning that become so important. The first one is this. We have to be an expression of Christ's love to the greater community of Tucson, Marana, and Oro Valley, and the cities around us. We have to be that expression of love in tangible ways, and we can do this. You know, we have countless small groups and ABFs that are doing some of the most amazing things even now. We have ABFs that are making Thanksgiving meals for families in our city that can't afford to have their own Thanksgiving meal. We have ministries that are making blankets for moms that are in poverty, and their new moms don't even have blankets for their children, and we're providing blankets. We have small groups that are ministering to refugees that come into our city and help. There's so many things that are happening that so many people don't even know about. And there are things that we do as a church, as a whole church, church-wide. The last couple of years, we have provided shoes for Marana School District. And you've probably noticed we haven't talked about that much coming into December here. And the reason is this. We want to move our shoe drive to March because there are so many things happening in December that make it difficult to really to take that further. And so we're going to move it to March for this reason. We believe that God is putting an even bigger challenge in front of us as a church body with that shoe drive. To not just provide shoes for one school district, but for 2 school districts. How about this next year, we make sure that every kid that needs shoes in Marana School District and Anti-School District have shoes, because this church, this movement said, we're going to love them. We're going to love them in this way. And you know what? We can do this. See? That's what's in front of us. And we're going to have ever-increasing moments where we're going to love this community in greater and greater ways as expressions of Christ. The other thing that I see coming up in the next year and in the decades to come is that Sunday mornings, the Sunday morning experience, this service, and the other things that go on with this must continue to be an expression of the deeper life in Christ that creates authentic life change. We have to be that expression of the deeper life, not an institution that's defending our dogma and doctrine and certain practices, but a life-giving community that is expressing that deeper life. But we have to do it in a way that creates space for those that come into this place and are asking the deeper questions because they face that emptiness. They have those doubts because they're lonely. And the deal on that is, the world around us are not asking shallow questions about spiritual things. They are asking questions of the soul. They're asking questions about meaning and purpose. Not just what do you say about how to behave or some doctrinal issue. They want to know if their soul and spirit matters to this world. They want to know if there's a God who is real and has something to say that is profound for their life. And I think, friends, that is who we are. That is our purpose. And we can be that expression week in and week out because that is where we as a community live. An amazing thing has happened this past year on this. This past year, you all have invited people in record numbers, and I mean record numbers. We have set an all-time 50-year record as a church for the most first-time guests ever to show up in an identifiable way to this church. We have had over 1,300 first-time guests that we've identified that have come to this church. And they came because you invited them. And I kind of think what's going on is God is looking at who you are and what you're doing, and God is saying, I've got some people in this city, and I'm doing something in their life, and I'm sending them to you. You're the place I want them to go, and they're showing up to this place. To me, that is so exciting. You really are being a movement, see? But the third thing is, we have to sustain it. Movements have to be sustained. It rests on your shoulders and my shoulders to sustain it. We have to sustain it with our time and our energy and our finances. We have to sustain it with our time. It means taking the time to live that spiritual life in a way that connects with people outside of this place, inviting them to this place. It means taking your time to serve in places like Kid City, to make Kid City the most phenomenal, life-giving ministry to children in the entire city, that there would be no better place for preschoolers or young children to spend their time, that they'd want to spend their time in a place like Kid City, that students have adults that want to come into their lives and invest in them and pull them into the deeper things of this world. It means people like you volunteering your time to say, I'll be a part of making this church the most welcoming place in the entire city on a Sunday morning, whether that is working out in the parking lot or someplace in here, or whatever I can do to make this place so rich and life-giving that people want to be a part of it. See, it means putting your energy into it. That means putting your heart into it. To say, I give my heart over to a vision that God has put before us. It won't be shallow, won't be institutionalized, but will be dynamic and alive. It means putting your finances into it. And not just in a way that says, when something comes along that I think is really cool, like the shoe drive or some other thing, then I'll give some money to it. To sustain a movement means a constant sustaining. It means that the people of that movement embrace it in a way that they say, with my finances, I will budget this, I will take a percentage of my income, and I will continue to put it to this so that week in and week out, it continues to move and evolve. It is the reason that a tithe has been a part of the church from the very beginning, from the very first century, because the people that were a part of that movement in that first century, it was to them to sustain it and to move it forward. And every century past, the believers within that movement have sustained it with their finances in an ongoing way. They have taken a percentage of what they have and they give it continually. And that's a challenge that I put before you, that if you're a part of this movement and are not doing that, pray about it. Figure out how you can play a part financially in sustaining this. And here's why. What you saw in that video a moment ago, that's what we live for. Aaron faces this horrible thing in his life, knowing that his life is going to end very shortly. But he had something he could turn to. There was a movement in his city that he knew the one that he loved so much, Karen, needed. And she needed with all of her heart. And I love, he says, I want to go to church. And Karen says, and now I realize he knew I needed to go to church. And I remember I got to meet Aaron on a couple of occasions. He would be in his wheelchair, sit right back in this section right over here. And about a week or two after he passed, we had an invitation. And I met Karen right up here when she walked that aisle and started this whole new relationship with Christ in the most amazing way. And Aaron sustained and was a part of a movement that got passed on to Karen. And Karen became a part of you all in this movement. And she reached out to Kevin and brought him into this movement. And his life was forever changed. I remember the Sunday he came down to get an invitation. You know what we want? We want to see that story repeated, not once, not twice. We want to see that story repeated thousands and thousands of times, because we are a movement and we're going to pull those in who are asking those deep questions of the soul, because we are the answer. I want to say this. Come hell or high water, political unrest, financial catastrophe, does not matter. We will be that church. And you're going to look back on this decades from now, and you're going to so love the life that God gave you as a part of this movement. Because there is few things in this world that are as rich as being a part of the movement of being the expression of Christ in this world. That's your destiny. Why don't you stand?